One of the most brilliant voices in modern theatre has gone silent, and the legacy he leaves behind is as dazzling as it is deeply human. Tom Stoppard, the acclaimed playwright and Oscar-winning co-writer of Shakespeare in Love, has died at the age of 88, closing the final curtain on a career that reshaped what audiences thought a play could be. Stoppard passed away peacefully at his home in Dorset, in the south of England, with his family by his side. His longtime representatives shared that he will be remembered not only for the intelligence and humanity of his work, but also for his razor-sharp wit, irreverent humor, generosity, and his passionate love affair with the English language. To colleagues, collaborators, and audiences around the world, working with him and knowing him felt like a privilege. Born Tomas Straussler in 1937, Stoppard began life far from the cozy image of the English literary establishment he would one day come to symbolize. His Jewish family lived in Zlin, in what was then Czechoslovakia, now the Czech Republic. His father worked as a doctor for the Barter Shoe Company, and when Nazi Germany invaded in 1939, the family was forced to flee to Singapore, where Barter had another factory. That escape was only the beginning of a series of upheavals that would echo through his later writing. As the Second World War intensified, danger followed them. In late 1941, with Japanese forces closing in on Singapore, his mother and her 2 young sons were evacuated once again, this time to India. Stoppard's father stayed behind, attempting to leave later, but died when his ship was attacked during the evacuation. That early experience of displacement, loss, and fractured identity would become a quiet undercurrent beneath the dazzling wordplay of many of his later plays. And this is the part most people miss: behind the verbal fireworks, there was always a deep well of grief and longing. In 1946, Stoppard's mother married British Army officer Kenneth Stoppard, and the family moved to a struggling, ration-bound, post-war Britain. The 8-year-old boy soon adopted his new country wholeheartedly. He later described how he had put on Englishness like a coat, growing into what many saw as the quintessential English intellectual, complete with a love of cricket and Shakespeare. Yet his life story suggests that his Englishness was, in some ways, a carefully crafted role layered over a more complex Central European past. Unlike many of his peers, Stoppard never went to university. Instead, he plunged straight into journalism at 17, starting out on local newspapers in Bristol, in southwest England. He later moved to London as a theatre critic for Scene magazine, watching plays from the outside before stepping boldly onto the inside of the stage world. That critic's eye never really left him. He always seemed keenly aware of how stories are constructed, deconstructed, and reshaped. Stoppard's early writing career spanned radio and television before he made his decisive breakthrough in theatre. He wrote scripts such as A Walk on the Water, broadcast on television in 1963, but it was Rosencrantz and Guildenstern Are Dead that changed everything. This play took 2 marginal figures from Shakespeare's Hamlet and placed them center stage, reimagining the tragedy through the confused, often comic perspective of characters who barely understand the plot they are stuck in. For many newcomers to his work, it remains the easiest way to see how he could make philosophy feel like comedy. A heady mixture of tragedy and absurdist humor, Rosencrantz and Guildenstern Are Dead premiered at the Edinburgh Fringe Festival in 1966. Its success quickly propelled it to Britain's National Theatre, then under the leadership of Laurence Olivier, and from there to Broadway. Overnight, Stoppard went from being a promising young writer to a major new voice. But here's where it gets controversial. Some critics at the time wondered whether so much cleverness left enough room for raw emotion. Over the following decades, Stoppard produced a remarkable stream of inventive, energetic plays that constantly pushed the boundaries of what theatre could do. Among them were the meta-theatrical whodunit The Real Inspector Hound, first staged in 1968, the acrobatic mixture of slapstick and philosophy in Jumpers, 1972, and Travesties, 1974, which throws together real historical figures like James Joyce and Vladimir Lenin in Zurich during World War I. On the surface, these works can seem like intellectual games. Underneath, they are wrestling with questions about history, art, power, and identity. His 1977 piece Every Good Boy Deserves Favor, written in collaboration with composer Andrei Previn, is a striking example of his political and moral concerns. The play centers on a Soviet dissident locked in a mental institution, blurring the lines between sanity and madness, truth and propaganda. This project was just one part of Stoppard's long involvement with human rights campaigns focused on the Soviet Union and Eastern Europe. For someone who once insisted he'd burned with no causes, his record of advocacy suggests a quieter, more complex commitment. Throughout his career, Stoppard loved to experiment with time, structure, and theatrical form. The Real Thing, 1982, is a moving and intricately layered romantic drama that uses plays within a play to explore love, betrayal, and authenticity. Arcadia, 1993, shifts back and forth between the early 19th century and the present day in an English country house, where characters debate poetry, landscape gardening, mathematics, and chaos theory while their personal lives unravel. To a newcomer, this might sound intimidatingly intellectual, but Stoppard's great trick was to make these heavy ideas feel funny, accessible, and emotionally resonant. He continued to weave together big themes and intimate stories in works like The Invention of Love, 1997, which reflects on classical literature and unspoken desire through the life of English poet A. E. Housman. Moving into the new century, Stoppard created The Coast of Utopia, 2002, an ambitious trilogy about Russian thinkers in the years leading up to revolution. A few years later, he turned to his own heritage in Rock and Roll, 2006, a play that sets British 1960s counterculture alongside the experience of life in communist Czechoslovakia, asking what freedom really means in different political systems. In The Hard Problem, 2015, Stoppard shifted his attention to one of modern philosophy and science's thorniest debates, the nature of consciousness. The play looks at the human mind through both scientific and religious lenses, asking whether our sense of self is simply the product of the brain or something more mysterious. For audiences new to these ideas, the play offers a way to grapple with big questions without needing a philosophy degree. Across all this work, honours poured in. Stoppard was widely celebrated as one of the greatest British dramatists of his generation, amassing major theatre awards and critical praise. 5 of his plays won the Tony Award for Best Play on Broadway: Rosencrantz and Guildenstern Are Dead, 1968, Travesties, 1976, The Real Thing, 1984, The Coast of Utopia, 2007, and Leopoldstadt, 2023. Even for people who have never seen a Stoppard play, those titles mark turning points in modern theatre. Biographer Hermione Lee has suggested that the special power of Stoppard's plays lies in how they fuse language, knowledge, and emotion. He was not only brilliant with words, he also poured feeling and curiosity into intricate intellectual frameworks. Some observers have long accused his work of being more clever than heartfelt, but Lee argues that many of his plays carry a deep, often understated sadness beneath the jokes and verbal pyrotechnics. And this is the part most people overlook: the laughter is often sitting on top of unresolved loss. That sense of hidden grief becomes especially clear in Leopoldstadt, one of his later works, which draws heavily on his own family history. The play follows a Jewish family in Vienna across the first half of the 20th century, as they move from apparent security and assimilation toward the horrors of the Holocaust. For Stoppard, this was not just another historical subject, it was a late reckoning with a past he had largely kept at arm's length. Stoppard only began to confront the full extent of his family's Holocaust story relatively late in life. After his mother died in 1996, he learned that many relatives, including all 4 of his grandparents, were killed in concentration camps. He later admitted that he had always known he was from a Jewish family, but he did not know who those relatives really were. For years, he felt he did not need those details in order to live his own life, yet eventually came to see that this distance from his roots was, in some sense, a self-deception. Out of that realization came Leopoldstadt. The play opened in London at the beginning of 2020 to enthusiastic reviews, just before the COVID-19 pandemic forced theatres to close worldwide. After this unexpected interruption, it finally reached Broadway in late 2022 and went on to win 4 Tony Awards. For many, it felt like a late-career masterpiece in which Stoppard allowed the emotional weight of his family history to rise fully to the surface. Despite being celebrated primarily as a playwright, Stoppard's output spilled far beyond the stage. He wrote numerous radio plays, a novel, and a television series such as Parade's End, 2013, which adapted Ford Madoxford's complex novels about love and war in the early 20th century. He seemed drawn again and again to moments when personal relationships collide with large-scale historical change. In cinema, his range was equally impressive and, at times,